What's up, guys? You are on the Air and Off the Books with Beth Ann and Samantha, and today we have a very, very special guest, which we're very excited about. If you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself, that would be
I would
amazing.
I would love to. Hi, I'm Ruta Sepetys. I'm an author of historical fiction. My novels include Between Shades of Grey, Out of the Easy, Salt to the Sea, The Fountains of Silence, I Must Betray You, and most recently, my collaboration, The Bletchley Riddle.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. I'm not even gonna lie, I'm so excited. You're one of my favorites. I have read everything except for the Bletchley Riddle. And Trisha, you said you're almost finished with it, right? I'm so excited to start it. I'm ready to get in. But okay, so first off, we would like to know, what did you do before you became an author?
Oh, goodness. Let's talk about my crazy path to publication and to becoming a writer. But I'm grateful for this question because I find that many people think that there's one way to become a novelist, that you have a degree in English or creative writing, or in my case, because I write historical fiction history, and that is the path. Oh no. I knew that I wanted to be an author when I was in third grade, and my sweet teacher, Mrs. Zimmer, gave an assignment, um, a creativity assignment, and I was going to write the next great American novel. It was called The Adventures of Betsy, except the next great American novel was not so great. And the parents highly objected to Betsy and called my mom.
Oh no.
Have you read The Adventures of Betsy? My mom said no. And my friend's mother said, well, I think you should. There's something seriously wrong with your daughter. And so then it became a big drama in third grade. And what human being, not even a student, I mean, child or an adult, wants to be at the center of an enduring drama? And it stole my courage. So I knew at 9 years old that this was my dream. And of course, I was very dramatic about it, but it stole my courage and I didn't write again for 20 years. I was still very interested in storytelling, but I chose to pursue storytelling through music, and not to tell my own stories, but to help songwriters and artists and musicians and video game developers and television producers tell stories with music. And so my degrees are in international finance and international management. And I lived in Hollywood. And for 22 years after graduation, I worked in music. And if you think about it, a song is a 3-minute story, isn't it? I mean, there's a plot, there's characters, and things are happening. And so that's how I was storytelling. And so I wasn't always writing. And it was only when, through working with songwriters and helping them realize that when they put a piece of their own story into a song, those were the songs that became the hits. And so helping people distill story into music resulted in one of these people turning to me and saying, Ruta, you've been asking us, what's our story? We want to know, what's your story? And I said, oh, my story, I'm Lithuanian. And there was this awkward pause. And the lead singer of the band said, oh, girl, I'm so sorry. How long have you had that? And I
Oh
thought, had what? And he said, Lithuanian. And I said, oh, no, Lithuanian's not an illness. He said, what is it? I said, Lithuania is a country. And long story short, he said, no, I don't accept that. That can't be your story, because with all due respect, many of us, we have no clue what it means to be Lithuanian. You better find out, how you might tell your own story. And do you know that snarky lead singer of that rock band, it changed my life and led me to write what became my debut novel, Between Shades of Grey. So, wow, talk about a windy road to path to publication. Yeah, I see Lori's got the book right there. It's awesome. So, yeah, but I tell people that I wished then, that when I was so young, that I would have known that failure is a prerequisite to success. And I wish I would have known that the more you fail, the closer you're getting. But I was quite frightened and it stole my courage. So for those 20 years, I didn't write. Yeah.
no.
So what made you choose historical fiction as opposed to, any other genre?
Or maybe like nonfiction or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Why historical fiction? Again, some stories of failure there. I once I moved to Nashville, I relocated to Nashville around 2002, and I left Los Angeles. It was a very disrupted time of my life because it was such a culture shock moving from LA to Nashville. And I began thinking about writing again. And so I joined a writers group, SCBWI, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, because I wanted to write for young people. Even though now, fast forward, I was in my 30s, the books that left the strongest impression on me were the books I had read when I was a teenager. So I knew I wanted to write for that audience. But actually, when I joined SCBWI and I wrote a first novel, I thought that I was going to write middle grade humor, right? And I wrote a middle grade mystery that I thought was humorous. And I went to some conferences where the manuscript was requested and critiqued, and an editor from a major publishing house requested the manuscript. And I was so excited. And I thought, oh my gosh. So I had researched agents, and there was this one agent that I really, really, admired. And I sent him a query and said, my manuscript has been requested and I'm seeking representation. And he said, oh, sure, send it to me. So he called me, which is very rare, for an agent to call you. And he said, yeah, so this middle grade mystery humor, not so funny. And he said, not so funny. He said, but I can see why the publisher is requesting it. And he said, it's kind of derivative. He's like, there's others like it out there. And he said, but in the envelope, this was back, you guys, when we actually mailed a manuscript. You didn't attach a PDF. We weren't emailing, we were mailing manuscripts. And he said, but in the envelope, there were 5 pages of something else. I said, yeah, I put that in. I kind of wanted to show you the range, of my work. And he said, Ruta, those lonely 5 pages, whatever that is your authentic voice. And do you know what it was? It was the first 5 pages of Between Shades of Gray.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I thought, again, we take a road, we get in the car, we think we're going in one direction, and then life and creativity, it can take different turns. And that's what happened to me. And what I realized with humor, which, mind you, I love to laugh. Like Lori and Trisha, they know that. Like, I love to laugh. But with my writing and creativity, what my agent helped me understand is that by laughing, I'm distracting and I'm saying, look here, meaning look elsewhere, but don't look here in my heart. And he said, no, when you really speak from your heart. And historical fiction allows me to give voice to human beings who never had a chance to tell their story, to people who are forgotten, to people who think the world, doesn't care about them. And it's a very powerful genre. It's a very elastic genre, historical fiction. Think about it. I could write a historical mystery. I could write a historical fantasy. I could write a historical romance, right? So all of those things together. But I do have to say, with my book, The Bletchley Riddle, yes, it's historical fiction, but I also did get, we got some humor in there, which was just a delight to write because I was writing for a younger audience and I was able to put some funnies in there.
That's awesome. I love that, like the correlation from what you were doing with your music really was able to kind of bleed into your writing. So you kind of came back around full circle and were able to give what you were giving just in this new like format, like you were saying. So you're still able to like speak and show the world and show these voices and things like that. I that's really awesome.
Also, like a really unique background, not one that we've like heard from an
I
author.
know. Yeah, that is really awesome.
That's really cool.
Especially that they're invested enough to tell.
And yeah, these, but I really believe in these intersections, these juxtapositions, whether it's writing or life. And sometimes, though, this is a really interesting intersection when I do an event, let's say at a bookstore or a library,
Mm.
and someone comes in that is a recognizable musician. And because of my vintage, let's just say, these musicians are normally like 80s rock people, right? And when a musician comes into a bookstore and the bookseller recognizes them and says, "Oh, may I help you?" And they say, "Yeah, I worked with, I think Ruta's here tonight. I worked with Ruta." And they immediately step back and say, "I think you've got the wrong Ruta." And the musician will say, "No, I don't think you really know Ruta." And the truth is, a lot of people don't. People don't ask me the questions that you're asking. So I really appreciate that.
So how long, what's the longest it's taken you to write a book from start to finish? How does that
Well,
usually?
right. I would say I just finished a novel that's actually going to be, I believe, sold as an adult historical novel. And
Oh,
I began that book in 2013. So that's what, 11 years now.
wow.
Um, Now, I would say, and mind you, I have to work on multiple projects at once because it, you guys understand, I'm so over the top about this stuff. My research process, I don't have to go to these great lengths, but I love it. And I feel like I'm able to represent a larger expression of the human experience by doing all this research. But because the research takes me so long, probably from start to finish, it's generally 5 to 7 years to when I begin researching, and then when the book is finished. And then I would say even 8 years, because when you turn in a book, then there's a year period where it's being set up at the publisher before it comes out. So Fountains of Silence took me a solid 7 years. I Must Betray You, a solid 5 years. Salt to the Sea, 5 years. Between Shades of Grey probably was the fastest because I'm Lithuanian, of Lithuanian heritage, so I really felt like I knew that history a bit better. And then Out of the Easy probably took me 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really
It's a long
cool. That's a
time.
long time. It's such a, and you can see that like your soul is in it because you invest so much of yourself in
Mhm.
like where you're going and talking with people. And so I'm assuming then that you've been like you go to these places and you seek out people and their stories and things like that. And like, do they get to like experience your books then once you're finished or when, like while you're working on it and things like that? Like the people from these different cultures?
I'm so glad you asked that question. People don't ask that often. Again, I'm so grateful. Yes, they do get to experience it. And these 5 to 7 years, it's not only writing, because I research and write at the same time. I feel that if I'm doing these interviews, and then I wait a year to begin writing, I'll lose that sense of emotional immediacy. I want to infuse it right away. But it's really also like an investigation. And when I do school visits, you just mention the word research and you'll see the students' eyes like roll back in their head. But when I say no, it's like I'm a historical investigator, and it truly is. It's like an investigation. And so when I choose a topic, I also then partner with a research team of true witnesses. And I not only interview them, there are several people, maybe a dozen, that come forward to be collaborators, and they're reading my drafts alongside of me, saying, "No, I wouldn't say it like that," or "This isn't the way it would be said," or "No, you've got this wrong." And so with let's take my novel I Must Betray You. There have been some Romanian people who have given me just the highest compliment, who have said, "Ruta, you don't know me and I don't know you, but somehow you've written my story. How has
Wow.
this happened?" And
Mm.
it's not me, it's the collaborators that you mentioned, these people that I work with who are working with me all along the way. And the works and the friendship, it continues. And sadly, some of the people who helped with Between Shades of Grey and Salt to the Sea, they're no longer with us, but their voice, is very much alive in these works.
On those same lines, Ruta, which one actually took you the longest to research or required the most difficult research process of your novels?
Yeah, without a doubt, The Fountains of Silence. I was in Madrid, and the students in Spain, I was at a high school visit, and they said, "You must write about Spain." And I recoiled and said, "No, I'm not Spanish." And they explained to me that after Franco, the dictator in Spain, died, they were so concerned about plunging into another civil war that they adopted what's known as the Pact of Forgetting. They agreed to forget. And
Oh,
so as a result, their parents and their grandparents don't speak about the history. And they said, it's so painful. We need an outsider to tell this story. And that's how I thought, okay, well, could I do this? And that's always a big decision when I'm choosing to write a book and choosing a topic. Not just what am I going to write about, but how am I going to write about it? What is the point of view? What is the point of entry here? How am I bringing the story to readers? And in this case, I mean, what right do we have to history other than our own? That's a very important question. And I don't have right to any history of Spain. So I created this American character who travels to Spain, and we see the story through his eyes. And that took me, because I am not Spanish, it took me 7 years going back and forth, living in the hotel at one point. That is the setting of the book. The hotel is still there. It was there in the 50s, the Castellana Hilton, and it's still there, living at the hotel, collecting items and artifacts from the hotel, from when it was the Castellana Hilton. I keep this on my desk. I have this little memento. I actually have a collection of keys from the hotel. And when I'm describing the key clatters in the lock, I know I have those keys and artifacts. And so that 7-year period also, it really helped me. I learned to read a bit of Spanish. I still can't speak Spanish, well, but I learned to read a bit of Spanish and understand Spanish and partnering with those people. And that book was it was a delight to write. Yes, it's a very heavy topic, but Spain in the 1950s, the land of sunshine and wine, it was really beautiful in many ways and emotional in a very fulfilling way.
that is so cool. I think I got distracted and missed one of my questions. This is great.
Who cares? Make them up along the way.
So I know when we ask authors this question, it's kind of it's not fair. And we know that. But do you have a favorite story that you've written? I mean, it's like picking your kids. Everybody always tells me that. But is there something that you really just loved or connected to the most, or?
Well, I find that oh goodness, it's probably very bad parenting, because I always love the book that I'm working on most recently the most, which is so terrible. But because I spend so much time, and that's where my head and my heart is, and I'm giving birth to this story, that I feel quite close. So for a while it was like, oh yes, it was, the Bletchley Riddle, and then I'm fickle, and then it's like, oh, now I really love this, story. I'm a bad book girlfriend, because I'm fickle. But I do have to say, I love each of the books for a different reason. For example, Between Shades of Grey, that is my family's story. And so of course that's, that's my father's family story. Out of the Easy is my mother's family story. Salt to the Sea is my cousin's story. She had passage on the Wilhelm Gustloff. And then I love The Fountains of Silence, because I would say, if I Must Betray You is a historical thriller, Fountains of Silence is a historical romance. And I loved that romance element. And, for I Must Betray You, just the shocking aspect of that underrepresented history, and the terror of tyranny. I love that, just because I so admire the Romanians' ability to endure, their fortitude, their creativity. So each one has a different, but right now, of course, I'm enchanted with what I'm working on now.
That's fair.
Do you have any crazy or kind of like wacko story that you can tell us that's like goes into your research that you've experienced while you've been researching your book?
Oh my gosh, where do I start? Yes. every every book you would think, right, after doing this for a while, that I would learn, and I don't. I still become so enchanted to jet off on some sort of harrowing research experience that I maybe didn't look into deeply enough before I signed up for it or begged someone to take me. And one of those recently, a novel that I am working on now, not the one that I finished that's unpublished, but one that I'm drafting right now. It tells the story of 8 million people who were diagnosed with an illness that was thought to be so highly frighteningly contagious that they were torn from their families, children, I mean, small children and adults, kids, teenagers, and they were exiled to remote islands around the world, only to later discover, oh, yeah, you know what? That disease, not so contagious. And what we did to 8 million people and how it's an unknown story. And I had the opportunity, I did a big research trip in February where I went to the Philippines and Indonesia and Singapore researching this. And I had an opportunity, or did I really concoct this opportunity? I don't know, to go to one of these very remote islands of the Philippines where people were imprisoned. And it took several days just to get there. And then once I got there, I had to take a boat journey and out to this remote island. And it was, 3.5 hours to get there and 3.5 hours to get back. Well, I got onto this boat and very young captain, because the person who was helping me said, it's really hard to find people who are willing to make this trip. And I'm thinking, yes, it's a long day, right? 3.5 hours on a boat and then the trip there and 3.5 hours back. No, what I didn't realize is that it's difficult to find a captain because it is such a harrowing journey, that this island was chosen because of its location, because no one ever goes in and no one ever comes out. And so when the boat pulled away from this idyllic, beautiful white sand beach, the captain turned to me once we were on the water and he said, whatever you do, don't scream. Whatever happens, don't scream, because that'll distract me. And I've done this once before. And I thought, oh my gosh, wait, what? Once before. And we set off on this journey. The inhabitants of this island are all of the ancestors of the people that were imprisoned there. They are the family members of these victims. They had never had a visitor, international visitor, let alone someone from the United States. And the boat was a bamboo kind of contraption, outrigger boat. And I said, aren't we going in a speedboat? They said, no. If we go in a fiberglass boat, because of the collision, the inevitable collisions, the boat will sink. We have to have this boat. And they had 2 people on the outriggers repairing as the boat was breaking, as we were going up to this island. And here I go. And I had dressed because they said, oh, you're going to meet the mayor and you're going to, great. So I dressed, business casual. They didn't tell me. I looked like a drowned wet rat. I did have the sense to take Dramamine because this was, really just crazy. And I do tend to get seasick. And then when we got up there, they had to lower like a rope and I had to scale this rock wall to get up to this island. And I was near tears, where I just thought, what have I done? And I had met people from the Philippines and I said, oh, I'm going to Culion. And they said, oh my gosh, that's amazing. But I didn't realize why it was so amazing. So that's my most recent, that was one of my most recent adventures. And do you know, I wouldn't change a thing. Those people truly believe that the world has forgotten them. And I spent even longer than I anticipated with them, which meant coming back, much later than we anticipated. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And the disease is called Hansen's disease, and it's also more commonly known as leprosy. And to
Oh.
meet with these beautiful human beings, some of them who, yes, have Hansen's disease, no longer active cases, but where no one has ever held them. No one has ever held their hand, an outsider. And to be able to do that was just so powerful that on the way back, I thought, if this outrigger boat goes down, it's okay. Because there was a lot of love today. And, but you would think that no. And I have some video too. Can you imagine? I tried to take video on my my phone. So I'll come back. I'll come to Kokomo and show my video and photos when the book comes out.
Amazing. That would be amazing. That's so cool. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy. I would be scared. I'd be like, no, gotta go back.
On that note, Ruta, what does your family and or your friends say when you tell them you're doing these things? Because I can see me going home and telling my husband I'm going to do X, and he would be like, no, you're not. You're not doing that. So what do they all think about it?
Exactly. And Lori, I think you may have even heard me tell the story about when writing Between Shades of Gray, I agreed to take part in an experience in a former gulag and subjected myself to, So my husband, he remembers that. I've had 2 back surgeries because of that experiment, because of the damage that I'll just say I did to myself, right? That was inflicted upon me. So yeah, my husband now, he does know. And however, I kind of soft pedal it sometimes. Like when he's like, wait, you're going where in the Philippines? Because my husband works in corporate America. He doesn't have a lot of vacation time where he can travel with me. We have to choose very carefully. And when I said they had called these islands the Islands of Death, and I said, I'm going to go to the Islands of Death. And he's like, of course you are, of course you are. But he didn't know that it was going to be that bad. But now my friends are saying, and some other authors I know, because of course, historical fiction authors, you become friends with other authors. I think they do think that I'm a bit out there. And do you really need to do that? Do you really, if I am writing about something a time period, something that I didn't experience myself, an event that I didn't experience, I really feel that I owe it to the people I'm writing about to do my due diligence, to do the research, to travel, to go wherever, whatever it takes to see them and meet with them. But yeah. And also I can't get people to go on trips with me. It's like when I say, oh, hey, I'm going to be researching. It's like, yeah, oh, I'm going to Poland or, I'm going to, you would think I would have had some takers for Spain. Right. And they said,
absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know what you're going to be doing. And my husband did go with me and we had a blast. Yeah.
Okay. So then what, in your opinion, is the most important feature of historical fiction then?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. The most important feature of historical fiction, I would say, is the ability and effort to try to make history human. When I am researching, it's so many facts and figures, right? And that can be dry. But when you make it human, suddenly it's very dimensional. Human beings are dimensional. We have thoughts and dreams and fears, and hopes. And so if you can make history human, you will bring a reader to the page and you will keep them there. If you make it human, they will connect with a character. And at that moment of connection, their heart opens. And at that point, they can care for someone that they've never met. Suddenly they want to find that country on a map. And at that moment of connection, a statistic becomes a human being, right? And so feelings stay with us longer than facts. So I would think that to make history human, that might be one of the most important elements of writing historical fiction.
this is interesting to me because I had a lot of people tell me that you should only be reading nonfiction. Like,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be reading fiction. You shouldn't, I don't know why you like waste your time on that. And I just, knowing like your answer from this previous question, I just want to know what your thought, what you would have to say to that process or that thought process of saying that, because like the way that specifically like your books have impacted me, especially I Must Betray You, knowing that that was in my lifetime was just flooring to me. And you're right, it jump started me, right, it jump started me into this like frenzy of researching, going online, seeing pictures, and it was just so like startling. And so I don't know what you like, what would you say to a comment like that?
I would say first, let's give credit where credit is due. Historical fiction sits on the shoulders of nonfiction, meaning that can be history texts, testimonies, journals, those are the bricks through which I build, my novels. However, I will say that we we have limited time, and unfortunately, even in schools now, we're losing our history majors. Do you know at some colleges, like history is becoming a hybrid major? There are some universities that have done away with their history major altogether. This blows my mind. And so if I wrote nonfiction, I would need to focus on the experience of, let's say, one family, or if I was writing about an event, or alternating chapters of different families. By writing fiction, it allows me to interview 100 people, let's say, for I Must Betray You, and then weave together these testimonies to create composite characters. And in doing that, maybe we can represent a larger human experience. And the goal in that is that if someone reads, let's say, I Must Betray You, about the Romanian Revolution, the next thing, what do I want? What's the goal? I want them to find the real stories, right? So at its best, fiction works in concert with nonfiction. It's a partnership. So I can't do that, but also without nonfiction. And I want readers, young and old, to go and find the source, find the primary source. But I also say that with fiction, so we have the chance to represent a larger human experience, but also, again, really make the history human. When I collaborated with Steve Schenken is a legend. He's the master of cinematic nonfiction. 3-time National Book Award finalist, LA Times Book Prize, Newbery Honor. I mean, on and on. But Steve, when he's writing nonfiction, you can't invent your way out of something. You can't amplify something to bring a reader to the page. Everything has to be found in that source material. Dialogue, he's including dialogue. So all of the pieces are real. And for Steve Schenken, it's how he or then arranges them, right? But I think sometimes we're a bit at an advantage with fiction with the emotional faders, especially with juxtaposition. What do I mean by that? For me, really, really great, fun art, and that can be music, painting, even athletics, it's always full of juxtaposition, these opposites, right? That when you place these opposites together, they throw light on each other. It's a very old device, Beauty and the Beast, sun and shadow, right? When you put these opposites together. And through writing fiction, I am able to do 7 years of research and identify those different lights, the light and the dark, and then assemble them in fiction in a way that maybe nonfiction might be limited, because they would say, these things didn't really go together, but we're going to put them together or something. So,
Right.
But again, I couldn't do what I do without nonfiction, without people say, oh, what's the use of writing a dissertation? What's the use of writing an academic paper? Oh my goodness. It's gold. Are you kidding? I admire those people, so much. And my work is built through their work.
Is there anything that you've written about where you kind of hit like a stump and found it challenging to get through?
Yes, and for different reasons. For example, when I was writing The Fountains of Silence and in Spain, some of the people that I needed to speak to, these elderly people who had lived through the Spanish Civil War or the post-war, really more the post-war period, um, they had adopted the pact of forgetting, and they felt uncomfortable to speak about it. In other cases, like I Must Betray You and Between Shades of Gray, those regimes, they hang over these people like a cold shadow, and the fear, even my own father was fearful. It was uncomfortable to talk about it. And memory is a slippery slope, right? Some of us are desperate to remember and others are desperate to forget. And that's natural. It's entirely natural. But those can sometimes be hurdles or stumbling blocks. Shame and guilt is an enormous hurdle and stumbling block. And with regard to I Must Betray You, this regime had blackmailed, 1 in every 10 people to become an informer for them.
Yeah.
And these people, they felt so terribly about that, even though they were in, it wasn't their fault. It's not like they had a choice that they were selected to become an informer. It wasn't always that way. Some people did agree to be informers, but those people, the shame of it. When I did events in Romania, at a couple of events, people slipped me envelopes. The bookseller said, someone dropped this off for you. And when I got back to the hotel and read it, they explained that they appreciated the novel. They were grateful to the point of tears that I wrote it, but they were so ashamed they couldn't show their face at the event. And that just breaks my heart. That again, that makes me even more enthusiastic to share these stories. And then there are stories that I'm researching because I have some pieces of history that I might not be able to use a treatment of a whole novel for. It might be a short story. Perhaps it'll end up one day via Audible or Spotify as an audio short, a short story. So sometimes the novel format is a stumbling block because I don't have 200 pages, to explain this. I have been for years and years researching with this community. There's a community that reached out to me that has to do with UFOs, okay? And reached out to me and said, we must speak with you. And, no one will believe us. And of course, I'm going to, speak with them about alien abduction and these things and the history of things that happened and that might have been covered up in the government. And again, it's an investigation. But in that case, the
Ruta,
suspension.
do not go up in a UFO.
If I do, you're coming with me. Let's make a pact. Let's make a pact. You are my wingman. I am going on the record right now that if we go in a UFO, you're my wingman. But just, the suspension of people who, people don't believe them. And so there's different stumbling blocks for different reasons. Also, in many cases, I'm not the right person to write about that, a particular part of history. I've had a lot of people ask me if I would write about communism in China. And I really want to help someone, to mentor someone. I really want someone from that culture to write that story. Yeah.
On that note, I was going to ask you this in person when you're here next month, but on that note, have you ever thought about writing about the U.S. immigration issues, regardless of what side of that fence you're on, telling someone's story that's,
Yes.
here?
Yes. And because think about it, I'm the child of an immigrant. My dad was 15 years old. He had been in a refugee camp for 9 years before he came to this country. And what he went through and endured, and the family lost everything, including some dignity and self-respect.
Absolutely.
It's an untold story. And I think there could be so many interesting ways. Yes. And thank you for asking that, because that's something that's really close to, to my heart. But my goodness, there are so many stories. I have a list of 26 in active development on my slate right now, so to speak.
It's a lot of stories.
You guys, that's crazy. I mean, and then there are some stories that I've been trying to write about. This is so funny. When I first got together with Steve Schenken to collaborate on a book, we both have these journals. I've got I have different journals. I have a field journal, I have a research journal, but this is like kind of my like I have these fabric journals that are my idea journals. And we had to take the vulnerable, task of, okay, let's open up our idea books to each other. And so, and mind you, Steve Schenken knew me from the book circuit. We do educational conferences together, and he knew that some of my historical fiction could be quite heavy and dark and sad. But he said, Ruta, I was not prepared. We were at a conference recently, and he admitted, he said, she opened up her idea journal, and he said, I just kept thinking, no way, no way, no way. Like, that's in your idea journal. One that I've been so, interested in, that I've done research for years. I discovered a group of teenagers that escaped from Jim Jones and Jonestown. If you remember the Jonestown story, and the story is so compelling. And of course, it is. If you know I don't want to give a spoiler for listeners. If you know the ending of Jonestown, it is truly, truly tragic. And I had this idea where what if the reader did come to feel attached to this charismatic leader, Jim Jones? So the reader is attached to Jim Jones and is feeling this, only to learn where the story goes. And it's funny because when we told the story on tour, so many readers, they said, no, don't do that. Don't do that. And so Steve Schenken wasn't the only one who said, no, don't do that.
It would be really cool, though.
I think it would be
It'd
cool.
be really gripping. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of Steve Schenken, since I'm almost done with the book, did you write the females version and he write the males version, which is kind of like how Mad Honey was done in that book, or was it more of a collaboration of the entire book?
It was a collaboration. However, the story, as you say, it follows two siblings, Lizzie and Jacob, 14-year-old Lizzie, 19-year-old Jacob. Jacob's a code breaker, right? Lizzie's a rule breaker. I wrote Lizzie.
I kind of figured maybe that was it.
I wrote Lizzie, and Steve had the Herculean task of writing this code breaker. And mind you, Steve Schenken, he would have been recruited. He'll argue with me, but he would have been recruited to go to Bletchley Park. He's just a math whiz. They wouldn't have let me in the gates of Bletchley Park. No way. But there were teenagers there who were messengers. And that's the character that I wrote. This 14-year-old girl who skips her ship to America and winds up at this code breaking factory. And they put her to work as a messenger. And this was a real story, a real person, several young girls. And we just had such a blast writing it. And talk about juxtaposition between code breaker, dutiful code breaker, and rule breaker, younger sister. Again, that juxtaposition was very much at play. And even in our writing styles, I'm sure that you guys have heard of plotters or pantsers. Plotters create a very detailed plot outline. That's Steve Schenken. The wall in his office, it looks like a murder investigation. He's got all these note cards and string and connecting things, and he has pieces of a story, and then he arranges them. Well, he's a plotter. I'm a pantser. I fly by the seat of my pants. I do 7 years of research. It's in my head and heart. And so when we first did our very first event together, and they asked about process, and Steve told the story, he said, oh, well, Ruta, I asked Ruta, what's your process? And I got really excited. And I said, well, I light a candle. And he looked at me and he was like, no, your writing process. And I said, yeah, I light a candle. And he said,
love that.
What for? I said, because then I close my eyes and I just let it flow. And he's like, you let what flow? I'm like, the story. He's like, but where is the story? I said, it's in my heart. And he's like, oh no. And we had chosen Bletchley Park. We had chosen to work together, and we had done a lot of the research. We had not discussed process. And if you could have seen Steve Schenken's face, he was frightened and he said, "I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable with that." And I said, "Okay, well, let's use your process." And he's like, "Well, I work in a 3-act structure." I'm literally Googling 3-act structure, you know? I mean, of course I've heard of it, but I was like, okay, how do we do that? But because I had worked in the music business and I had worked with so many songwriters and everybody has a different process, that I knew like, okay, let's do what makes you feel comfortable. And so what we did was we plotted, I'm not joking, 4-hour epic Zoom sessions, plotting of this is going to happen and this is going to happen and this is going to happen. And then we went our separate ways and I lit my candle and I closed my eyes and I wrote, and it worked out just fine. And we had a blast. I mean, and when we decided to collaborate, we were warned this could go very badly, our agent said. And our agency made us sign a collaboration agreement that if we hated each other, that we wouldn't fight in public, that we like, what? None of that happened. None of that happened yet. I don't know. Not yet.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
It's interesting to see how like other writers, like what their process is. 'Cause
Everybody's had a different one.
yeah, we've talked to some people that are like, I start from the end and then I work my way to the
back,
beginning.
or I start in the middle, or they just get ideas and put it in there and then puzzle it together. Or
Yeah.
it's really cool. And it's awesome that you were able to be flexible and like reassure him, like, okay, let's just do the thing, and then we'll come back
Yeah.
together. And
And
That's
also
really
me,
awesome.
To me, that's the play. When authors say, "Oh my gosh, writing, it's excruciating. It is so hard. It is so," and I think, are you kidding? Hard is getting on that outrigger boat and nearly drowning. Like the research is hard. Sitting with human beings who have survived a lottery of life or death and telling them that they're not forgotten, that's hard. But lighting my candle and playing like, and I also do have to say, as if you can tell, I don't take drafting too seriously because I'm not a writer. I'm a rewriter, which is a cliche, but it's really true for me. My first drafts are so ugly. They're so ugly. And then I sit in my office with a candle and I read my work aloud, listening for rhythm and flow. And that's how I revise. But I do write from beginning to end. I don't, I really start with the very first sentence and then just go all the way to the end.
that's really cool. We haven't met anybody yet that does it quite like that. I have another question. Since you were into music and everything like that, have you ever thought about when you write a book or publish a book, creating a soundtrack to go with that would, like, people could read and then hear that with it?
I know
and
that's becoming like
feel-
a thing.
It
now.
is, yeah. And I didn't know if you had ever considered something like that.
I did. I was on sort of the early side of, because imagine my debut novel, I was still working full time for my first few books, I was working full time in the music business. I wasn't a full-time writer. I still had a full-time job. So of course that was, in my my mind. And so for Between Shades of Gray, this incredible composer and pianist, Gavin McHale, created a piano soundtrack that is so gorgeous and so moving. And some of my international publishers used it. And we actually toured together in Europe, and we went to concert halls where he would perform the soundtrack and they would bring students up to read passages from the book. In Scandinavia, they did a stage production. And I only did it for that book. I just felt like, oh, this was such a great experience. I don't know if I'll ever be able to recreate it. So yes, and sometimes the music, we would share the music also. That would allow English teachers to partner with music departments. And people in the music departments, then they would perform the music and the students would read passages. And there have been just some great collaborations through that. And I'm a big believer in that. But, speaking of music, a question that I often get is, what do I listen to when I'm writing? And I can't listen to music when I'm writing, because after working in the music business for decades, it is so distracting. If I listen to a piece of music, I'm thinking, oh wow, that's a fretless bass. Oh wow, and that's a double bass pedal. I know where this is going to go. Okay, like I analyze the music, and not always. I can listen to music. I dance every day. I'm a bad dancer, but I love to dance. And I'm always listening to music and dancing, and I'm not dissecting the music then, but it's distracting for me. Now, when I do listen to music is if I feel like I have not writer's block, but writer's knot. When I am really grinding on something and I don't know how I'm going to make this work, then I go for a walk and I listen to music. And that combinatory play, for me, my brain, it's a different part of my brain that listens to music and analyzes music than the part that of my brain that I use for writing. And so what happens is when I'm listening to music, the other knot in my brain is sort of loosening and untangling. And inevitably, I figure out at the end of that walk how I'm going to finish the scene or where I'm taking it. So I use music for different tools in writing.
Does Trisha and Lauren, you guys have any extra questions? I could keep you like all day, but
We can chat all day.
Well, we will mention, since we're talking about keeping you all day, you will be at the Kokomo Library in December. That would be December 18th. We're so looking forward to it. So excited to have you back. I honestly can't wait.
I know.
I am so excited. I've been looking forward to this and just sharing, in the years since I was last there, where the journey has taken me and what I've learned and how important libraries and library communities and readers are, not to me as an author, but to these true witnesses who you help them feel seen and understood, and how powerful that is. So I can't wait. And of course, to answer questions, I know you probably have a lot of great writers in the community, and I want to, meet with your writers too.
this has been amazing. And I am
Yes.
so thankful that we were able to interview you and that you were willing to meet with us, because you are a stunning person. And it's going to be so exciting to be able to meet you in person. I'm really excited.
I'm so excited. And thank you for taking the time to create a program where authors can talk about their work, about their process, about their creative partnership with readers. So it's an honor and a privilege to chat with you. I appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much. Awesome.
December 20th, right? No, December 18th.
December 18th.
Thank you, Ruta.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.